My son told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas. He said I would ruin the aesthetic of his $1 million home. He thought I was just a poor retired old man living on a pension. He forgot who I was. He forgot that I was the one who owned his aesthetic. That night, I made one phone call. By the time I was done, my son wouldn't just lose his house. He would lose everything he thought he knew about his life. My name is Gregory Stone, and I am 70 years old. The engine of my 10-year-old Ford F-150 rumbled as I pulled off the main highway, the tires crunching on the pristine paved road of the Austin suburbs. This part of the city always felt foreign to me, like a different planet. The houses weren't just houses. They were statements. Sprawling, sterile monuments of glass and white stone sitting on lawns so green they looked fake. To everyone in this neighborhood, I was exactly what I appeared to be, an old man, widowed, living a quiet life on a factory foreman's pension. My Carhartt jacket was worn at the elbows, my hands were calloused, and my truck had seen better decades. It was a good cover. It had been a good cover for 15 years. I was on my way to my son Nathan's house. He's 42, my only child. Today was my granddaughter Emily's 7th birthday, just a few days before Christmas. In the passenger seat, wrapped in a soft blanket, was her gift. It was a dollhouse. But it wasn't some plastic thing you buy at a big box store. I had spent the last 6 months in my workshop crafting it by hand. It was a perfect 1/12 scale replica of the first home I ever shared with my late wife, Clara. A tiny 2-bedroom bungalow on the east side. I'd carved every miniature cedar shingle for the roof. I'd hand-painted the tiny blue shutters. I'd even replicated the slight familiar warp in the front porch boards. That little house was built from 6 months of my time, my memory, and my love. I pulled up in front of Nathan's home. It was a $1.5 million block of modern architecture. The driveway was already packed with high-end cars. BMWs, a few G-Wagons, a shiny new Mercedes. My old Ford looked like a stray dog that had wandered into a pedigree dog show. I could hear the party from the street. Loud music, the high-pitched laughter of adults drinking expensive wine in the middle of the day. I parked on the street, carefully lifted the heavy dollhouse, and walked up the long stone path. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. This wasn't the world I'd built for Nathan. This was the world his wife Diana had built using him. My love for Emily was the only reason I ever set foot on this property. I rang the bell. The music was so loud it took a moment. Then the heavy pivot-style front door swung open. Nathan stood there. He was wearing a crisp linen shirt that probably cost $300. His hair was perfectly styled. For a split second, his face lit up with a generic party smile, but when he saw me, the smile didn't just fade. It evaporated. It was replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. "Dad," he stammered. He physically stepped onto the porch, pulling the massive door almost closed behind him, blocking my view of the party. "Dad, what are you doing here?" My own smile faltered. The cold Austin air nipped at my ears. "What do I mean, son?" "It's Emily's birthday. You invited me last week, remember?" I held up the dollhouse. "I finished her gift." Nathan didn't even look at the gift. His eyes darted past me to my truck parked on the street. He winced as if the very sight of it caused him physical pain. "Dad, I know. It's just, today is really not a good time. It's chaotic." "I won't stay long," I said, my voice starting to feel as old as I looked. "I just want to give this to Emily and wish her a happy birthday." Before he could answer, the door swung open again. Diana. She was 40 and she was a presentation. A sleeveless white dress that looked like it was sculpted from marble. Her face was ironed smooth by ambition and expensive treatments. Her blonde hair was perfect. Her eyes didn't just look at me. They assessed me, valued me, and dismissed me in less than a second. "Nathan," she said, her voice a sharp, cold whisper that cut right through the party noise. I thought you handled this. Nathan flinched. I was just about to, honey. Diana's eyes raked over my Carhartt jacket, my old jeans, my work boots. Then she looked at the dollhouse in my hands with pure disgust. She turned back to Nathan. She didn't bother to lower her voice. She wanted me to hear. Get him to leave, now. My parents are flying in tonight for the holidays. I cannot have that. She gestured vaguely at me at my truck at the dollhouse, ruining the entire aesthetic for Christmas. It's embarrassing. Just deal with it. She didn't wait for an answer. She just turned and vanished back into the warmth and laughter of the party, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. I stood there. The music pulsed. Embarrassing. Aesthetic. I looked at Nathan. His face was flushed beet red. He couldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at the perfect, expensive slate tiles of his porch. He was a 42-year-old man, a father, a husband, and he was completely, utterly terrified of his own wife. Dad, he mumbled, running a hand through his perfect hair. Dad, listen. She's just stressed. You know how these parties are. I know how she is, Nathan, I said, my voice quiet. No, you don't understand, he said, getting defensive. She's right. It's just not a good time. We have important guests. And about Christmas. He took a deep breath, finally looking up at me. His eyes were pleading with me to make this easy for him. About Christmas, Dad, it's going to be packed. Her whole family is coming. It's a formal thing. And well, maybe it's best if you just don't come this year. We weren't expecting you. We weren't expecting you. The words hit me. But it wasn't the way you see in the movies. There was no sudden sharp pain. The sadness didn't come. Instead, a profound cold clarity settled into my bones. The kind of clarity you get in the dead of winter right before a storm when the air is perfectly still and sharp enough to cut. I looked at the dollhouse in my hands. 6 months. 6 months of my time, my hands, my memory. 6 months of carving tiny window frames and sanding miniature floors, all for a little girl I loved. All for a son who was now telling me I wasn't good enough to be seen by his new rich family. I looked back at Nathan, at his expensive shirt, at his terrified, weak eyes, and for the first time I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. And then I smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was a smile he had never seen before. It was the smile of Gregory Stone, the man he never knew. Okay, Nathan, I said, my voice suddenly light, almost cheerful. I understand completely. Aesthetic. I wouldn't want to be a bother. Dad, it's not like that. No, it's fine, I said, holding up a hand. You're busy. Your guests are waiting. I bent down and placed the dollhouse, all 6 months of my love, on the cold slate porch. It looked small and terribly out of place, just like me. You have a good party, son. I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I didn't stomp. I walked step by steady step back to my old, embarrassing truck. Dad. Wait. I heard him call from the porch. I didn't mean, Dad, don't forget your gift. I got into the F-150. I put the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with a familiar, reliable growl. I looked in the rearview mirror. Nathan was standing on his porch next to the dollhouse, wringing his hands. He looked small and pathetic. I put the truck in gear and drove away. I didn't look back. He thought I was a poor old man. He thought I was a burden. He thought he and his wife were in control. He had forgotten who I was. He had forgotten who he was. It was time to remind him. I didn't drive home. My home, the small 2-bedroom bungalow where Nathan thinks I pinch pennies, was on the other side of town. I drove the opposite way. I drove east, past the airport, past the new high-tech campuses, and deep into the industrial sector. The part of Austin that doesn't make it onto postcards. The part where the roads are cracked and the buildings are just giant windowless boxes of corrugated steel. The truck rumbled over a set of railroad tracks. The sky was turning a bruised cold purple as the sun set. I didn't feel the sting of Nathan's words anymore. That aesthetic comment. The casual, brutal dismissal. It wasn't stinging. It was clarifying. It was the final heavy click of a deadbolt sliding into place. I pulled up to a nondescript warehouse at the end of a dead-end street. A faded sign on the chain-link fence read, GS Woodworking. It was a dummy corporation, one of many a shell I'd set up decades ago. My old Ford looked perfectly at home here, parked among rusted delivery vans and discarded shipping pallets. I got out. The air smelled of diesel and ozone. I keyed a long code into a rusted, unassuming keypad on a steel side door. The lock buzzed a heavy sound, and I stepped inside. The first floor was exactly what it looked like, a cavernous, dusty, and dormant workshop. Old lathes, drill presses, and massive table saws sat under heavy gray tarps covered in a fine layer of sawdust. This is what Nathan thought I did with my retirement. He thought I piddled around with wood. It was my hobby, yes. But it was also my cover. I walked to the back past a defunct break room where a single fluorescent light flickered erratically. I entered what looked like a dark, greasy storage closet filled with old manuals and oily rags. I pushed aside a heavy rolling steel shelving unit. Behind it was not drywall. It was a reinforced steel door with a biometric hand scanner. I placed my right hand on the cold glass. A small green light scanned my palm. The machine hissed, and the vacuum-sealed door clicked open. The room I stepped into was silent, cold, and dark. I flipped a single switch. It wasn't a workshop. It was a command center. A long, curved desk faced a wall of 6 large monitors. They hummed to life, bathing the windowless room in a cool blue light. A secure server rack blinked silently in the corner next to a private satellite uplink. This wasn't a foreman's retirement den. This was the private office of a man who moved millions of dollars before most people finished their morning coffee. I sat down in the black leather chair, the kind that costs more than my truck. I looked at the desk. There was only one item on it besides the keyboard. It was a small, custom-engraved brass plaque, a retirement gift from my old partner Peterson. It didn't in lot say Gregory Stone. It just said Stone. Because I am Stone. I am the Stone in Stone & Peterson Global Logistics, one of the largest privately held freight and logistics empires in the state of Texas. I didn't work at a factory. I owned the factory, and the 200 trucks that serviced it, and the 4 distribution centers they shipped from. I didn't retire 15 years ago with a small pension and a gold watch. I retired after a strategic buyout that made the front page of the Wall Street Journal's business section. My current net worth as of this morning's market close was $82 million. $82 million. And my son, my only child, my heir, had just told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas because my worn-out jacket and my old truck would ruin his aesthetic. I looked at the only photo in the room framed on the wall opposite my desk. It was Clara, my late wife. She was laughing, her eyes crinkling at the corners. The photo was taken on the porch of that tiny bungalow, the very one I had just spent 6 months replicating in miniature. Clara. She was the reason for all of this. She grew up with nothing. I grew up with slightly more than nothing. When Peterson and I started the company, it was just the 2 of us and 2 rented flatbed trucks. We worked 20-hour days. We built this thing from grit, diesel fumes, and handshake deals. When the money finally came, it didn't trickle in. It came like a flood. And it terrified her. "Greg," she'd said to me, her hand on my arm, her voice always gentle but firm as steel. "This money, it's a tool. It is not a life. Don't let it spoil him. Don't let it make him weak." She had seen it happen to other families, friends of ours, who struck it rich. Their children grew up entitled, soft, useless. children who inherited fortunes but had never learned the value of a single dollar earned through their own sweat. "Promise me, Greg," she said, her voice thin in that sterile hospital room just before the cancer took her. "Make him stand on his own 2 feet. Don't let this money be a curse. Let him build his own life." So I promised. After she passed, I sold the large house in Westlake Hills. I moved into the small, simple bungalow she and I had loved. I created the retired foreman persona. I gave Nathan a first-class education, a modest starter fund for his first house, and then I stepped back. I told him the inheritance was mostly gone, tied up in Clara's medical bills and some bad investments. I let him think I was just another retiree getting by, comfortable but not wealthy. I wanted him to build his own life. I wanted him to become a man. I wanted him to be proud of himself, not of his father's bank account. I looked at the blank monitors. I had been watching. I thought I was protecting him. But Clara and we were wrong. We were so naive. We thought that having money would corrupt him. It never ever occurred to us that the idea of money, the hunger for it, the deep abiding shame of not having it, would corrupt him just as badly. He didn't grow up strong and independent. He grew up bitter and resentful. He saw my simple life not as a philosophical choice, but as a personal failure. His failure. He married a woman, Diana, who was just as hungry, just as status-obsessed, just as ashamed of modest beginnings as he was. They weren't building a life. They were building a brand, an aesthetic. And I, the father he was ashamed of, the poor old man, was the single greatest obstacle to that aesthetic. The coldness I felt on that porch wasn't just the winter air. It was the absolute chilling realization that my life's greatest project, my son, was a catastrophic failure. My promise to Clara, my grand 15-year experiment in humility, had backfired completely. It hadn't made him strong. It had made him cruel. My fingers, steady and sure, moved across the encrypted keyboard. I brought up a secure line. It rang twice. "Peterson." His voice was gravelly professional. Always professional. Paul Peterson had been my lawyer, my financial advisor, and my closest confidant for 40 years. He was the only other person on earth who knew the full truth. "It's Greg," I said. The temperature in the command center was a constant 68 degrees, but my voice felt colder. "Greg." He paused. He knew my voice. He also knew I never called him from this line unless something was wrong. "What's happened?" "I need you to pull up a file," I said, ignoring his question. "The Nathan Stone Family Trust." I heard the sound of typing on his end. Paul was old school, but he was fast. "Got it," he said. "The Austin property, the one in the preserve, $1.5 million valuation. What about it? Refresh my memory, Paul. The arrangement. Exactly as it stands." "It's just as we structured it 10 years ago," he said. "You purchased the property outright through a shell LLC, Hill Country Holdings. You then created the trust and transferred the title to it. We set up a fake mortgage agreement through a third-party servicing company. Nathan thinks he's paying a $3,000 mortgage every month to some bank in Delaware." "And where does that $3,000 actually go?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I just needed to hear it. I needed to pour salt on the wound. "As per your instructions," Paul said, "it's rerouted. 100% of it is deposited directly into a separate shielded investment trust for your granddaughter, Emily Stone. As of this morning, that account holds." I heard more typing. "Just over $430,000. It was a brilliant setup, Greg. A forced savings plan for his daughter." His daughter, my granddaughter. The little girl whose birthday party I was just kicked out of. The little girl whose father was ashamed of me. I looked at the blank monitors. I thought about the dollhouse sitting on that cold slate porch. "Cancel it," I said. The silence on the other end was heavy. Paul wasn't just my lawyer. He was my friend. He'd held Clara's hand at the funeral with me. "Greg," he asked, his voice careful, "what do you mean, cancel it?" "I mean exactly that. Cancel the entire arrangement, today. I want you to dissolve the trust's claim on the property, transfer the title from Hill Country Holdings back to the main Stone and Peterson corporate portfolio, shut down the fake mortgage agreement, and I want you to stop the automatic rerouting of that $3,000 payment. Greg, if you do that, the servicing company will register an immediate default." "I know," I interrupted. "That's the point. But, Nathan, he'll be blindsided." "He'll be fine," I said, my voice flat. "He's worried about his aesthetic. This will give him something real to worry about." Paul was quiet for another long moment. He knew not to push, but he had to be sure. "This is a significant move, Greg. Are you certain this isn't just you being angry? This is a permanent decision." I thought about Nathan's face, the panic, the shame, the weakness. I thought about Diana's cold, dismissive words, embarrassing, ruin the aesthetic. Was I angry? No. Anger is hot. What I felt was the cold, clean precision of an icicle. "It's a business decision, Paul," I said. "The asset is being mismanaged. The current occupants are unreliable. They are a risk to the brand. I'm reclaiming the asset." Paul sighed. He knew that tone. It was the stone talking now, not the grandfather. "All right, Greg," he said, his voice all business again. "I'll file the transfer paperwork immediately. It'll be done by end of day. What about the servicing company?" "Send them an official standard notice," I instructed. "Tell them Hill Country Holdings is reclaiming the property. I want a standard by-the-book 30-day foreclosure notice sent to the occupants. Certified mail, tomorrow morning." 30 days, Paul repeated. "That's aggressive, Greg, especially right before Christmas." "Is it?" I looked at the photo of Clara. They weren't expecting me for Christmas. Now they'll have something else to focus on. Send it. "It's done," he said. "Is there anything else?" "Yes," I said. "I want you to start digging. I want to know why they were so desperate for me to be gone. They're in trouble, Paul. I can smell it. Nathan lied to me 6 months ago about his job. He had me co-sign a $200,000 line of credit. He said it was just in case. I want to know if he's touched it. I want to know what he's hiding." "I'll get my investigators on it immediately," Paul said. "I'll have answers for you within 48 hours. "Good. Thank you, Paul." I hung up the phone. I didn't get up. I just sat there in the blue light of the monitors. The first move was made. The first thread was cut. Nathan and Diana were at this very moment still inside that $1.5 million house, laughing, drinking, celebrating their perfect, aesthetically pleasing life. They had no idea that the foundation they were standing on had just turned to dust. They thought they had 30 days. They didn't realize they had already lost everything. 2 days passed. The silence was profound. It was Christmas Eve. I spent the day in my garage workshop, the one attached to my small bungalow, the one that smelled of pine shavings, old oil, and the varnish Clara used to love. This was the life Nathan and Diana pictured for me, a lonely old man puttering around with scraps of wood living in the past. They weren't entirely wrong. I was living in the past. I was sanding a small, simple wooden train, a late gift for a neighbor's grandson. My hands were steady. The chisel moved smoothly, carving the contours of the engine. This was my piece. This was what Clara and I had chosen. A quiet life. As I worked the sharp edge of my chisel scraping away the wood, I thought about them. I pictured their Christmas. The massive, perfect tree flown in from Oregon, dripping with white lights. The cold, minimalist table settings. The caterers in the kitchen. I wondered if Emily ever got the dollhouse, or was it stuffed in their garage, hidden away, deemed too folksy for Diana's aesthetic. I wondered if Diana's parents had arrived, and if Nathan was successfully playing the role of the successful son-in-law, his face aching from a forced smile. The certified mail receipt from Peterson confirmed the foreclosure notice had been delivered yesterday afternoon. Diana would have signed for it. They would have opened it. They would have read it. And yet for 2 days, nothing. The silence was almost disappointing. Maybe I thought they had a backup plan. Maybe they were wealthier than I knew. Maybe they didn't need the house. Maybe my one move, my single act of defiance, had meant nothing at all. I finished sanding the small train engine. The sun went down. 5 o'clock. 6 o'clock. I went inside. I opened a can of chili and heated it on the stove. I sat at my small kitchen table, the one Clara and I had bought from a second-hand store in 1978. The house was quiet. 7 o'clock. 8 o'clock. Christmas Eve. I should have felt lonely. I should have felt the sting of my son's rejection. I didn't. I felt calm. The deep, heavy calm of a man who has finally made a decision and is just waiting for the consequences to arrive. At exactly 9:07 p.m., the storm broke. My old flip phone, the simple, dumb phone I carried to maintain my cover, started to vibrate on the kitchen table. It didn't just vibrate. It buzzed with such a frantic energy that it skittered across the Formica countertop. I looked at the small, pixelated screen. Nathan. I stared at it. I let it ring. Once. Twice. 10 times. It stopped. Silence for 3 seconds. And it started again. Nathan. I let it go to voicemail. It stopped. 3 seconds. It rang again. Nathan. I let it go. It stopped. 3 seconds. It rang again. This time, Diana. Her name flashed on the tiny screen. I smiled. A small, tight smile. I let it go to voicemail. This continued without exaggeration for 20 minutes. It became a frantic, alternating rhythm of incoming calls. Nathan. Diana. Nathan. Diana. They weren't just calling. They were panicking. They were pinging me one after the other like two drowning people fighting over a single life preserver. Finally, the house fell silent again. The phone lay on the table, exhausted. I picked it up. The screen glowed with notifications. 38 missed calls. 22 new voicemails. I poured myself a glass of water. I sat down. I turned on the speakerphone. I pressed play. The first message was Nathan. His voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the voice of the confident, dismissive man who'd turned me away from his porch. It was the high-pitched, breathless squeal of a terrified boy. Dad! Dad! Pick up the phone. What did you do? What did you do? The bank called. They said the house. Dad. It's a foreclosure. They said we have 30 days, 30 days. It has to be a mistake. It's Christmas, Dad. You have to call the bank. You have to fix this. Fix this. The message ended with an abrupt fumbling click. The next one started instantly. Diana. Her voice wasn't a squeal. It was a low, vicious snarl, the sound of a cornered animal. You did this. You senile old fool. You think this is funny. You think you can ruin us. We got the letter. Our lawyer said it's real. You canceled the payment. How dare you? You will call them back and you will fix this right now, or I swear to God. Gregory, I will. Click. The next message. Nathan again, this time clearly sobbing. Dad, please. Diana's parents are here. They heard everything. They're looking at us like, Dad, my life is over. My job, the house, everything. You have to fix this. It was just a stupid comment about Christmas. It was just a stupid comment. You can't destroy our lives over a stupid comment. Click. Diana again. Gregory, if you don't pick up this phone, we are coming over there. We are driving over right now, and you will fix this, you miserable, selfish old... Click. I listened to all 22 messages. It was a symphony of desperation. A chaotic hour-long opera descending from confusion to rage to weeping to outright incoherent threats. When the last message finished, I pressed delete. I sat back in my chair. The house was silent once more. I analyzed what I had just heard. The panic. The sheer animal terror in their voices. And something didn't add up. Losing a house is bad. It's a catastrophe. Having it happen on Christmas Eve in front of your wealthy in-laws is a humiliation beyond words. I understood that. But this was more than humiliation. This was Armageddon. This was my life is over terror. This was not the reaction of a successful 42-year-old man and his wealthy wife who just lost their primary residence. They would be embarrassed. They would be furious. But destroyed, no. If they lost this house, they would simply move. They would rent. They would downsize. They would be angry, yes. But they wouldn't sound like their world had just ended. This reaction wasn't about losing a $1.5 million house. This was the reaction of two people who had just lost their only lifeline. This was the panic of people who didn't just lose their aesthetic. They had just lost their escape route. They weren't just worried about where they were going to live. They were terrified of what they were running from. I looked at the dark screen of my flip phone. My son had lied to me 6 months ago. He had looked me in the eye, his own father, and lied about the stability of his job. He'd manipulated me into co-signing a $200,000 line of credit. He said it was just in case. And I realized with a sudden sinking certainty that this foreclosure wasn't the end of my plan. It was just the beginning. They were hiding something much, much bigger, and I was about to find out exactly what it was. The phone was silent now. I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, the old clock on the wall ticking loudly, each sound a heavy thud against the silence. 38 missed calls, 22 voicemails. The reek of their panic, their rage, their absolute primal terror still hung in the air, thick as smoke. I replayed the sounds in my head. My life is over. You've destroyed us. We're ruined. I turned off the speakerphone. The house was quiet again. But my mind was not. I tried to line it up. I tried to make the math work. A man like Nathan with a wife like Diana lived on image. I understood that. Losing a $1.5 million home was a social catastrophe. Being exposed in front of her wealthy parents, the ones they were so desperate to impress, was a humiliation. But destroyed, ruined, no. It didn't add up. A man like Nathan doesn't just have one option. If they lost this house, the house I was paying for, they would simply move. Diana's family, the ones she was so worried about, would surely step in. They would rent another pristine, aesthetic-approved property. They would complain. They would blame me. But they wouldn't sound like their lives were over. The terror in their voices wasn't the sound of embarrassment. It was the sound of people whose only escape route had just been set on fire. It was the sound of Sprawling who weren't just losing a house. They were losing their last chance. This wasn't about the foreclosure. The foreclosure was just the trigger. The panic was about something else. Something they were running from. And then I remembered. 6 months ago. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was a hot, humid July afternoon. Nathan had shown up at my bungalow unannounced. This was unusual. He rarely came to my poor side of town. He was wearing jeans and a simple polo shirt, not his usual tailored suits. He was playing a part even then. He sat at my kitchen table, the one Clara and I had refinished by hand. He kept running his hands through his hair. "Dad," he'd said, his eyes focused on a scratch in the old Formica tabletop. I'm in a tough spot." I waited. "Things at the firm are..." Not good, he'd said. The market's down. They're talking about layoffs. Big ones. I think I'm on the list. I remember feeling a small, sad twinge. Not surprise, just sadness. I'm sorry to hear that, son, I'd said. Yeah, well. He finally looked at me and his eyes were filled with a practiced, desperate sincerity. I wouldn't ask. You know I wouldn't. But Diana, she's terrified. If I get laid off, we won't be able to cover the mortgage, the car payments. We need a safety net. Just for a little while. Just until I find something new. What do you need, Nathan? Just a cosign, Dad. A line of credit. 200,000. It's just a safety net. I promise I won't even touch it unless it's a real emergency. The bank they just won't approve it for me alone right now with the rumors at the firm. But with your name on it, your good credit, my good credit, the good credit of a retired factory foreman. He had no idea what he was really asking for. He didn't know he was asking an $82 million corporation to back his safety net. I'd hesitated. I remembered Clara's voice. Don't let it make him weak. But then I looked at my son. He looked broken. I thought he was finally learning humility. I thought he was coming to his father for help. I couldn't let my granddaughter be on the street. All right, son, I'd said. I'll cosign. But this is for emergencies only. You understand? Absolutely, Dad. Thank you, I promise. You won't even know it's there. Now sitting in my kitchen on Christmas Eve, the silence of the house felt like a tomb. You won't even know it's there. The panic in his voice on the voicemail. It wasn't just about the house. It was about the $200,000. I picked up my secure phone from the office in the basement. I hit the speed dial for Paul Peterson. He picked up on the first ring. He was always working. Paul, it's me again. Greg, I heard the fireworks, he said dryly. 38 missed calls. They sound distressed. Their panic is wrong, Paul. I said, my voice low. It's too much. It's not just the house, that they're hiding something else and something bigger. What do you need? 6 months ago, I co-signed a line of credit for Nathan. $200,000. He promised he wouldn't touch it. He said his job was on the line. I heard Peterson let out a long, slow sigh. The sound of a man who has seen this movie before. Greg, I want to know, Paul. I want to know why they were so desperate for me to be gone. I want to know why they were planning to leave the country on Christmas Day, and I want to know how much is left in that line of credit. I want to know everything he's been doing for the last 6 months. Paul was silent for a beat. Greg, I can find out. I can have answers for you by morning. But you have to be prepared. If he's been lying about the house, he's been lying about this too. Are you ready for what I might find? I looked at the old clock on the wall. Clara's clock. Ticking, ticking, ticking. I'm not the one who needs to be ready, Paul, I said. He is. It was Christmas morning. The rest of the city was quiet, a world of rustling wrapping paper and family breakfasts. I was in my command center, the windowless, secure office hidden behind the dusty facade of my warehouse. I'd been there since 5 a.m., staring at the dark monitors, nursing a cup of black coffee that tasted like ash. I was waiting. The encrypted line chirped exactly at 8:01 a.m. I hit the speaker. Paul? Greg. That was all it took. In 40 years, I have heard Paul Peterson's voice deliver news of corporate takeovers, hostile mergers, and the death of my wife. I know all his tones. This was one I hadn't heard before. It was the sound of a man who was professionally disgusted and personally heartbroken. You're on speaker, Paul. Tell me what you found. I'll start with the line of credit, he said, his voice clipped all business. The $200,000 line you co-signed 6 months ago. You asked if he'd touched it. And he didn't just touch it, Greg. He activated it the same day you signed, the same day. The first withdrawal was for $50,000. The remaining $150,000 was drained in 4 separate transactions over the next 2 weeks. The account has been sitting at a zero balance, accumulating interest for 5.5 months. The coffee cup felt heavy in my hand. He had lied to my face. The safety net wasn't a safety net. It was the plan. He'd come to me after he already knew he needed the money. "All right," I said. "That's the what. Now tell me the why." "His job." I heard Paul take a deep breath. This was the one he didn't want to say. "Greg, Nathan wasn't worried about getting laid off." I waited. "He was fired 6 months ago, the day before he came to you for the line of credit." I closed my eyes. The image of him in my kitchen 6 months ago, looking so beaten down, so humble, flashed in my mind. It was all an act. A performance to secure $200,000 from his poor old father. "Why?" I asked. My voice was quiet. "What did he do?" "It wasn't a layoff, Greg," Paul said. "It was termination for cause. I spoke to their general counsel. He didn't want to talk at first, but when I mentioned my name, and your name, he opened up. He said they were trying to handle it quietly out of respect for you, but they were building a case. A case for what?" Paul stopped dancing. "Embezzlement." The word just hung there in the sterile air of the office. Embezzlement. It wasn't a word I associated with my family. It was a word for spreadsheets, for newspapers, for strangers in cheap suits being led into courthouses. It wasn't a word for my son. "He didn't just take a little Greg," Paul continued, his voice hardening. "He'd been at it for over a year, skimming from client escrow accounts, moving fractions of pennies, then whole dollars, then thousands. He was smart. He covered his tracks. But he got greedy. He got sloppy. They caught him." I tried to breathe. "How much?" "Their internal audit found he'd stolen just over $190,000. I did the math in my head. He stole $190. He borrowed $200. He'd used my money, my good name, to pay back the money he'd stolen. He'd used fraud to cover up his theft." "So, the line of credit, he paid them back?" I asked. "He did," Paul confirmed. "He paid the firm back in full anonymously through a third-party account. He was trying to make the criminal charges go away. He was trying to pay out their silence before they filed a report." "And did they pay?" "No," Paul said. "They took the money, but they're still filing. Embezzlement is a felony. Restitution doesn't just make it disappear. They're preparing the criminal case now. They were going to serve him the papers after the new year." I stood up and walked over to the concrete wall of the warehouse. I pressed my forehead against the cold, rough surface. My son was a thief. He wasn't weak. He wasn't just influenced by his greedy wife. He was a criminal. He had looked me in the eye and manufactured a lie about layoffs to manipulate me into giving him the money he needed to cover his own crime. And I had fallen for it. Gregory Stone, the man who had built an $82 million empire by reading people, by never missing an angle, had been played like a cheap fiddle by my own flesh and blood. "Greg, you still there?" Paul asked. "I'm here." My voice was a rasp. "So, the foreclosure, their panic. It all makes sense now," Paul said, thinking out loud. Losing the house was bad. But losing the house when you have no job, when you're $200,000 in debt, and when criminal charges are about to drop, that's not just a setback. That's checkmate. Checkmate. "He had no income," I whispered, realizing the full scope of it. "He's had no income for 6 months. They've been living on that line of credit. My line of credit. And whatever was left of it, Greg, which wasn't much." I thought of Diana, her obsession with aesthetic, her expensive clothes, the parties, the Mercedes. They weren't just living beyond their means. They were living entirely on my means, on my name. "Thank you, Paul," I said. "There's one more thing," he said. "The why. Why were they so desperate for you to be gone by Christmas? It's not just because they were hiding this. It's worse." My blood ran cold. "Worse? How can it possibly be worse than embezzlement, Paul?" "I'll have the full report for you tomorrow," he said. This part I need to verify in person. It's unbelievable. Greg, just stay safe. And don't talk to them. Not until you've heard what I have to say." He hung up. I stood in the silence of my office. The calm I felt on Christmas Eve was gone. The cold precision was gone. It was replaced by a slow, burning, radioactive rage. He hadn't just insulted me. He hadn't just lied to me. He had used me. He had used my love, my trust, and my good name to cover up a felony. And he was still hiding something. I looked at the phone. I knew they would call again. They were desperate. They were trapped. And trapped animals are the most dangerous. I picked up the phone and dialed my head of security. "Alex," I said, "I need a full surveillance team. On my son's house. I want to know who they talk to. I want to know where they go. And I want a detail on my granddaughter, Emily. Effective immediately." My son thought he was fighting for a house. He had no idea what he had just started. I was still trying to process the numbers. $190,000. Stolen. $200,000. Borrowed. My name. My debt. My son a criminal. My entire life I had built a fortress of financial security. I had done it to protect my family, to give them the one thing Clara and I never had: peace. And in one afternoon, my son had taken that fortress, my name, my reputation, and he had tied it to his own sinking ship. "So," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "he's broke. He's a thief. He's facing prison. And I'm left holding the bag for 200 grand. "That's the shape of it, Greg." Paul's voice came over the speaker, heavy with the bad news. "But that's just the what. It still doesn't explain the why. Why Christmas? Why the desperation to get you out of that house? Why the 38 missed calls? It still felt disproportionate." I ran my hand over my face. "What do you mean it sounds like a pretty complete picture of desperation to me, Paul?" "No," Paul said. "Think like they do. They're cornered. They're rats. They've just lost their house. They're about to be exposed. What's their next move? They don't just sit there and wait for the police. They run." I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of my desk. "Go on." "I did what you asked, Greg. I dug deep. I put our investigators on their travel records, their recent purchases, their online activity. And I found it. This wasn't just about hiding the foreclosure notice from you. This wasn't just about aesthetic. This was about their exit strategy. Your son and his wife, Greg, they were planning to flee the country." The words hit me. Flee. Abandon everything. Abandon me. Abandon their daughter. "Where?" I asked. "One-way tickets. Booked 3 weeks ago. Departing from Austin Bergstrom International Airport. Destination Owen Roberts International Airport. Grand Cayman. The Cayman Islands. Of course. A non-extradition country. A place to disappear with whatever money you had left." "And the departure date, Greg," Paul said, his voice dropping. "That's the kicker. The departure date was today, December 25th, Christmas Day, 3:30 p.m. It all clicked into place. The cruelty, the urgency, the absolute need to have me, the poor old dad, out of the way. "They needed me gone," I said, the realization settling like ice in my stomach. They needed the house for Christmas, not for her parents. Her parents were never coming. They needed the house to look normal. They needed to keep up appearances right up until the last possible second. Exactly, Paul said. They needed to seem like the perfect happy family, right up until they packed their bags, drove to the airport, and vanished. By the time anyone realized they were gone, by the time you realized they were gone, they'd be on a beach, and you'd be left holding the bag. I thought of Diana's voice. I cannot have that ruining the entire aesthetic for Christmas. She wasn't worried about her parents. She was worried about her alibi. She was worried that my presence, my poverty, my questions would somehow unravel their plan before they could execute it. My foreclosure notice, my one single act of defiance, had been a stray bullet that had hit their escape plan right in the engine. They were going to leave me, I whispered. It wasn't a question. They were going to leave me with a $200,000 debt, a criminal investigation into my co-signed loan, and they were going to disappear. They weren't just running from the law. They were running from me. They were going to abandon their daughter, Emily. My blood ran cold. Wait, Paul. The tickets. You said one-way tickets. Plural. Who was traveling? I heard Paul shuffle some papers. 2 adult tickets, Greg. Nathan Stone. Diana Stone. That's it. I felt the floor drop out from under me. What about Emily? What about my granddaughter? Paul was silent. Paul, I said, my voice rising. What about the 7-year-old girl? Her birthday party was just 2 days ago. Greg, Paul said, his voice quiet, pained. There was no ticket for Emily. They were leaving her behind. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. This was a level of monstrousness I was not prepared for. To rob your own father, to betray him, to flee. That was greed. That was cowardice. But to abandon your own child, your 7-year-old daughter, to abandon her on Christmas Day, to leave her behind, to face the fallout of her parents' crimes. That wasn't just greed. That was pure, unadulterated evil. They were going to leave her with me. The senile, incompetent old man they were so ashamed of. That was their plan. Leave the girl, take the last of the cash, and disappear. Paul, I said, my voice shaking not with rage but with a horror so profound it made me sick. I know, Greg, he said softly. I know. But, Paul, this still doesn't add up. I said, my mind racing, trying to find some piece, any piece that didn't fit this horrible puzzle. Why? Why the panic? If they were planning to run, why did my foreclosure notice stop them? Why did that destroy them? Why not just run sooner? Because Greg, Paul said, and I heard the final terrible piece of the puzzle click into place. Because they needed to run with money. And their plan to get that money, it was much, much bigger than the $200,000 you already lost. I waited. This is the part I had to verify in person, Paul said. This is the part I didn't want to believe. Greg, the tickets to the Caymans were just step 1. Step 2 was the real plan. And it was scheduled for tomorrow, December 26th. What was scheduled for tomorrow, Paul? What did they do? They filed an emergency petition with the Travis County Family Court, Paul said. They weren't just running from the law, Greg. They were planning a full-scale robbery. Their plan, the real plan, was to have you legally declared mentally incompetent. What was scheduled for tomorrow, Paul? I asked. My voice was low. What did they do? Paul let out a long, heavy sigh. The kind of sound a man makes when he has to deliver a eulogy for someone who is still alive. Greg, he said, and his voice was pained. The Cayman tickets, the embezzlement, that was just them trying to stop the bleeding. The real plan, the The one they've been working on for months. That was scheduled for December 26th. Tomorrow. He paused. They filed an emergency petition with the Travis County Family Court. My mind went blank. A petition, a hearing. What kind of hearing? Greg, he said, and I could hear him steeling himself. They filed a petition for an emergency guardianship hearing. They were going to have you declared legally mentally incompetent. The words didn't make sense. Incompetent. Me. I felt a strange hollow laugh bubble in my chest. It died before it reached my lips. They. What? On what grounds? On the grounds. Paul said, his voice now dripping with professional contempt, that you are suffering from senile dementia, that you are a danger to yourself and your finances, that you are no longer capable of making rational decisions. I stared at the concrete wall. My son Nathan, the boy I had taught to read, the boy whose fevers I had nursed, the boy I had protected. He was trying to have me declared insane. But the evidence, I stammered. There is no evidence. I'm perfectly fine. I just spoke to my doctor last month. You don't need real evidence for an emergency petition, Greg. You just need testimony. And they had it. We pulled the file. They had sworn notarized affidavits from 3 of Diana's friends. Friends who our investigator confirmed all received consulting fees from Diana last week. All 3 of them swearing they'd seen your rapid mental decline. I felt sick. They had a full narrative, Greg. Paul continued, his voice cold as a scalpel. They painted a picture. They told the court you're an old man living in abject poverty and self-neglect. They claimed you were refusing care, that you were unstable. They even twisted your hobby. My woodworking. They called it a compulsive obsession with childlike objects. They called your dollhouse a clear sign of a regression to childhood. They were going to use the very gift you made for your granddaughter as proof that you had lost your mind. I thought of the dollhouse sitting on that porch. I thought of the 6 months of love I'd poured into it. And they were going to use that as a weapon. The plan was simple, Greg, Paul said. They would show up to the hearing tomorrow as the concerned family. They would present the affidavits from their paid-off friends. They would tell the judge with tears in their eyes that you had become erratic and paranoid. They were even going to use the incident at the party against you. What, but they were the ones who… Of course, Paul cut in. It's perfect. They'd say, we invited him for his granddaughter's birthday, Your Honor, and he just stared at us, left his gift, and drove away. He was confused. He didn't even recognize us. They manufactured the evidence, Greg. They poked the bear, and then they planned to go to court complaining that the bear had growled. My son had done this. And then what? I whispered. What was the end game? The end game, Paul's voice was sharp. The end game was to get the judge who would only have their side of the story to grant them emergency temporary guardianship. They would have you committed, placed in a secure facility, a nursing home, while they sorted out your affairs. And once they had that guardianship, once they had power of attorney, they would have full legal access to everything. He let that sink in. They weren't just planning to run Greg. They were planning to liquidate you, to sell your house, your truck, your tools, everything they thought you had. They would have paid their $200,000 debt, paid off the embezzlement, and then used the rest of your life savings to fund their new life in the Caymans. They were going to leave you to rot in a nursing home legally erased, while they drank cocktails on a beach, living off the money you earned. I looked at the picture of Clara, her laughing, honest eyes. Don't let it make him weak. I hadn't made him weak. I had made him this monster, this coward. This wasn't just a betrayal. This wasn't just theft. This was This was a level of cold, calculated patricidal greed that I had never in my 70 years known was possible. They weren't just planning to abandon their daughter. They were planning to abandon me, to bury me alive after stealing my name, my money, and my mind. The rage that had been a cold, clean icicle. It was still cold. But it wasn't an icicle anymore. It was a glacier. A vast, silent, unstoppable force. "Greg, are you there?" Paul asked. I was there. Oh, I was more there than I had been in 15 years. They think I'm poor," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "They think they're doing all this for a small house and a foreman's savings." "Yes," Paul said. "They have no idea, Greg. They're trying to rob a corner store not knowing it's the front for the entire Federal Reserve." "They're not just trying to rob me, Paul," I said. "They're trying to erase me." I stood up. I looked at the 6 monitors, dark and waiting. "Mom, please. We can still fix it." Benjamin begged, his voice cracking with a desperation that was almost pathetic. "We're family, aren't we? A family doesn't betray," I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the real estate office. "A family doesn't steal. A family doesn't plan the mental destruction of one of its members." "What you are," I said, looking at him, at his wife, at his daughter, "is not a family. It's a criminal organization that shares a last name." "We gave you 45 years of our lives," Eleanor shrieked. "You didn't give me 45 years. I shot back, my voice like steel. "I gave you 45 years of my life. I gave up everything for you. And you were just waiting for me to die, to inherit the pittance you thought I had." "We need that money, Mom," Benjamin finally roared, his true face showing. "We have debts problems. And that's why you decided to drive me crazy," I said. "That's why you decided to steal from me. That's why you decided to destroy the last years of my life." "It wasn't personal," he spat. Those 3 words. It wasn't personal. 45 years of love. 45 years of sacrifice. 45 years of raising a boy I hadn't sired but had loved as my own. And it wasn't personal. "You're right, Benjamin," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the entire room. "It wasn't personal for you. And from now on, it won't be personal for me either." I turned to my lawyer. "Dr. Montgomery, I believe we're finished here." I hung up the phone. The war had been officially declared, and I had all the weapons. I hung up the phone. The speaker clicked off, plunging the command center back into its usual humming silence. The monitors glowed, showing financial data streams and market reports that meant nothing to me in that moment. I just sat there. I didn't move. I didn't pace the concrete floor. I didn't pound my fist on the cold steel desk. I didn't swear. I just sat. I stared at the rough gray concrete wall opposite me. I listened to the quiet rhythmic whir of the server rack. I counted the seconds as they ticked by in my head. 1, 2, 3. I sat there motionless for 10 full minutes. The hot burning rage I felt when I learned about the embezzlement, that was gone. The shock I felt when I learned about the line of credit, that too was gone. All of it had been burned away like fuel, leaving something else in its place. Ice. A profound structural and perfectly clear sheet of ice was forming inside my chest. They hadn't just insulted me. That was the party 2 days ago. They hadn't just lied to me. That was the line of credit 6 months ago. They hadn't just stolen from me. That was the embezzlement. No. This was something else entirely. They had planned to erase me, to have me declared incompetent, to use my love for my granddaughter, the dollhouse I built with my own hands, as a weapon to prove I was insane, to lock me away in a facility, to strip me of my name, my mind, my identity, and my freedom. This wasn't just a betrayal. This wasn't just a theft. This was an execution. They were planning to bury me alive. A senile old man, a burden, a man who had lost his mind, a man who refused care. The narrative they had built, it was perfect, and I had walked right into it. My simple clothes, my old truck, my quiet life, my obsession with woodworking. I had spent 15 years building my cover to protect my son from the poison of wealth, and he in turn had used that very cover as the blueprint to destroy me. The irony was so sharp, so perfect, it almost made me admire the sheer diabolical efficiency of it. They thought they were attacking a poor, retired foreman. They thought they were kicking a sleeping dog. They had no idea they had just kicked a hibernating grizzly bear. 10 minutes were up. The ice was fully formed. I knew exactly what to do. I picked up the secure phone. I dialed Peterson. He answered on the first ring. "Greg, are you all right?" His voice was filled with genuine human concern. "I'm fine, Paul," I said. My own voice surprised me. It was calm. It was steady. It was the voice I used to use in the boardroom, the one right before I was about to gut a competitor and sell their company for parts. "Paul, I have new instructions. I need you to listen very carefully." "Anything, Greg. What's the play?" "First," I said, "the foreclosure notice we sent." "Yes. Cancel it." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Greg, I don't understand. I thought that was the point." "You thought I wanted to punish them by taking the house," I said. "That was an emotional move. This is a strategic one. I don't want them panicked about the house. I want them panicked about the money." "Go on," Paul said, his voice shifting. He was back. He was all business. He understood. "Cancel the foreclosure immediately. Call the servicing company. Tell them it was a clerical error, a system mistake. Restore the fake mortgage agreement. Restore everything related to the property. I want Nathan to wake up tomorrow morning, check his account, and see that the house is safe. I want them to feel a wave of relief. I want them to think they're safe." You're giving them the house back." "I'm letting them think they still have the house," I corrected. "I'm leaving the cheese in the trap. They're cornered rats, Paul. If we take away their hole, they'll just scatter. I want them to stay right where they are, thinking they've outsmarted the confused old man." "All right," Paul said. I could almost hear him smiling. "Clerical error. The foreclosure is gone. What's next?" "Next," I said, "we cut off their oxygen. The $200,000 line of credit. The one I co-signed. The one you're now liable for. That's the one. I want you to freeze it, not cancel it. Freeze it. Effective immediately. Call the bank. Use my authority as the primary guarantor. Tell them you suspect fraudulent activity on the account, which is the God's honest truth, and that you are locking it down pending a full investigation. I want it frozen so tight, not a single dollar can be moved in or out." "Oh, that's beautiful, Greg," Paul said. "They'll wake up thinking the house is safe, but the cash they were living on, the cash they were going to use to run to the Caymans, is gone." "Exactly. They'll be trapped. They'll be in that house with no job, no money, and a criminal indictment hanging over their heads. They'll panic, and they'll make a mistake." "And when they do," Paul asked. "When they do," I said, "we'll be there. That's the last thing. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. I want you at my bungalow, the small one, the foreman's house, and I want you to bring 2 men with you, not lawyers, not accountants. I want the 2 best private detectives on your payroll, the ones who look like they mean business." "You're planning a confrontation." "I'm planning an intervention," I replied. "They're desperate. They're out of cash. Their escape plan is ruined. Their only remaining move is the competency hearing. They have to come to me. They have to either beg me for money, or they have to accelerate their plan to have me committed. I looked at the photo of Clara, her laughing smile. Either way, I finished. I'll be ready for them. Tomorrow, Paul, we end this. We end this for Clara. We'll be there at 10, Greg, and be careful. Don't worry about me, I said, hanging up the phone. They're the ones who need to be careful now. I didn't have to wait long. It was the day after Christmas, 10 o'clock in the morning. I was in the small kitchen of my bungalow reading the newspaper, a simple cup of black coffee steaming on the formica table. The house was silent. I was waiting. I heard the car before I saw it. It came down my quiet residential street too fast. A squeal of brakes, a sound entirely out of place in my sleepy neighborhood. Then a car door slammed, followed immediately by another. Heavy, frantic footsteps on my porch. Then the banging. Not a polite knock. Not an angry pound. It was a desperate, panicked, rhythmic slamming, like someone trying to break the door down. I folded my newspaper, took a slow sip of my coffee, and stood up. I walked to the door. I looked through the peephole. It was Nathan. His face was pale, glistening with sweat despite the cold. His eyes were wide, darting back and forth. Diana was right behind him, her perfect hair a mess. She was clutching her phone in a white-knuckled grip. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. Before I could say a word, Nathan pushed past me, stumbling into my small living room. Dad? Thank God. Thank God you're here. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip painfully tight. He was shaking. Dad, I don't know what's happening. The line of credit, it's frozen. They froze the account. We're ruined. We have nothing. You have to call them. You have to tell them it's okay. You have to help me. His voice was high-pitched, cracking. This was not the man who had told me I'd ruin his aesthetic. This was a cornered animal. Diana rushed in behind him, but she had already chosen a different strategy. Her face was streaked with tears. They were real tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated rage and terror. She was a terrible actress. Greg, she sobbed, rushing toward me. She never called me Dad. Greg, please, we are so sorry. We're monsters. We know. What we said about Christmas. We were stressed. We were horrible. We were wrong. She actually tried to grab my hand. I let her. Her skin was clammy. But you can't do this to us, she wept, her voice climbing. They froze everything. We went to the bank this morning. The line of credit. It's locked. We have nothing, Greg. We can't pay for anything. We will lose everything. You have to help us. I looked at her, then I looked at my son, who was pacing my small living room like a caged wolf. Everything? I asked. My voice was quiet, curious. Everything, Nathan shouted. The house, the foreclosure notice. We thought we could use the line of credit to find a new place to tide us over. But it's gone. They said it's frozen for fraud investigation. What did you tell them, Dad? What did you do? I saw it then. The final piece of their desperate puzzle. They had lost the house. My foreclosure notice had been a clerical error. They had felt a moment of intense relief. And then in the middle of their celebration, in the middle of their escape plan, they had reached for the $200,000 I had guaranteed. And they'd found an empty frozen account. They hadn't just lost their shelter. They had lost their jet fuel. They were stranded, trapped. No job, no house, no escape. And the legal consequences for Nathan's embezzlement were still barreling toward them. I didn't tell them anything, I said calmly. I just told them to freeze the account. But why? Diana shrieked. After everything, we said we were sorry. Why would you do this to your own family? I looked at her, this woman who had planned to have me committed. I looked at my son, the thief. And I did what they expected the poor senile old man to do. I looked confused. I let my shoulders slump. I let a look of befuddlement cross my face. I don't understand, I said, my voice shaky. I thought you were spending too much. I just wanted to put a pause on it. Just until we could talk. I didn't know it would freeze fraud. Why would they say fraud? I let them see the dementia they wanted to see. Nathan and Diana exchanged a quick, frantic look. It was a look of pure, agonizing frustration. They couldn't yell at a confused old man. It wouldn't work. Nathan visibly tried to calm himself down. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "Okay," he said, forcing his voice to be gentle the way you speak to a child or an invalid. "Okay, Dad. It's okay. It was just a mistake. A big mistake. But you can fix it. You just have to call the bank. Right now. You're the co-signer. You have to tell them it's all a misunderstanding, that there's no fraud. You have to tell them to unfreeze the account. Right now." "Yes, Greg," Diana chimed in, her voice dripping with fake, desperate sweetness. "Please, just one phone call. That's all we need. Then we can all sit down and talk. We can fix everything." They were lying again. They didn't want to fix anything. They just needed the money. They needed to run. I knew Peterson had my investigators watching them. I knew they were trapped. I nodded slowly, putting my hand to my head, as if I was overwhelmed by all the noise. It's all so much. So fast. The house, the money. I don't feel well. I walked slowly to my old sputtering kettle and filled it with water from the tap. My hand was perfectly steady. I put it on the stove and turned on the gas. The click, click, click of the igniter was the only sound in the room. Nathan was vibrating with impatience. "Dad, the phone, please call the bank." I turned and looked at them. Two predators caught in a trap, now trying to sweetly coax the hunter into letting them out. I smiled. A simple, grandfatherly smile. The kettle hissed as it began to heat up. "Sit down," I said softly, gesturing to the old mismatched chairs at my kitchen table. "Both of you. You look terrible." They stared at me, confused by the invitation. "I'll make us some tea," I said, "and you can tell me all about losing everything." They stared at me. I had invited them in to talk. I had offered them tea. I, the confused old man who had just accidentally frozen their $200,000 line of credit. The kettle on the stove began to hiss a low-rising shriek that filled the small kitchen. Nathan couldn't stand the silence. He was vibrating his leg, bouncing so hard it shook the cheap Formica table. Diana was worse. Her eyes, red-rimmed from her fake crying jag on the porch, were darting around my simple living room, looking at my old furniture, my worn-out rug, as if she was mentally calculating what she could sell first. "Dad," Nathan finally burst out, unable to wait for the tea. You have to call them. You have to call the bank now. I can't. We can't. It's all a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" I asked. I turned slowly from the stove, holding two chipped mugs. "It sounded pretty clear, son. Fraud investigation. That's a strong word for a misunderstanding." Diana immediately launched into her performance. The tears welled up instantly, a practiced, perfect display of victimhood. "Greg," she said, her voice catching. "He didn't want to tell you. He was too ashamed. He didn't want you to worry." I placed the mugs on the table. I sat down. The old wooden chair creaked under my weight. "Ashamed of what, Diana? He made a mistake," she sobbed, reaching across the table to put her hand on Nathan's, a gesture of a supportive, loving wife. "A terrible mistake. But it wasn't his fault, the company. They've been awful to him." I looked at Nathan. He had his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. He was playing his part too, the broken son. "Tell him, honey," Diana urged, rubbing his back. "Tell him. He's your father. He'll understand." Nathan looked up at me. His eyes were desperate. "Dad, they accused me of losing money. A client's account. It wasn't my fault, I swear. The market it tanked. But they're blaming me. They said I had to pay it back or they'd press charges, that they'd ruin my career." I just stared at him. The lies. They were so easy, so smooth. "So I panicked," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I didn't know what to do. That's why I asked you for the line of credit. I thought I could use it to pay them back and then pay you back slowly before you ever knew. I was just trying to fix it, Dad. I was trying to protect my family. I was trying to protect you from the shame." He was good. I had to give him that. He had twisted the narrative. He wasn't a criminal. He was a victim. He hadn't stolen the money. He'd lost it. He hadn't committed fraud against me. He'd done it to protect me. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. "So the 200,000, I said, it was to pay back this lost money." "Yes," he said, nodding vigorously. 190,000, and the other 10. It was just to live on, Dad. Until I found a new job. I am looking. I swear." "We're ruined, Greg," Diana chimed in, the tears flowing freely now. "We paid them, but now we have nothing left. We've been living on credit cards for weeks. And now you froze the account. It's the only thing we had. And now we're going to lose the house too. We're going to be on the street. All because of a stupid comment about Christmas." She buried her face in her hands. "We said we were sorry. We're begging you, please, Greg, just call the bank. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them there's no fraud. Please, we're your family." The kettle shrieked a piercing, painful scream that filled the entire house. I stood up slowly, turned off the gas, and poured the boiling water into the 2 mugs. The room was silent except for Diana's performative sobbing. I placed 1 mug in front of Nathan, 1 in front of Diana. I sat back down. They looked at the tea, confused. "I see," I said. "So you lost $190,000, and then you borrowed $200,000 from me to pay it back. And you've been lying about your job for 6 months. And you were planning to fly to the Cayman Islands on Christmas Day. All because you panicked." Their heads snapped up, both of them. The sobbing stopped instantly. Diana's face 1 second ago, a mask of tragic despair, was now frozen in absolute ice-cold shock. Nathan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He was pale as a ghost. "How?" he whispered. How did you know about the Caymans?" "Embezzlement," I said. It was just 1 word, but it landed in the center of the kitchen table like a grenade. "What?" Diana breathed. "Embezzlement." I repeated, my voice as calm and flat as a frozen lake. "That's the word you're looking for, Nathan. Not lost money, not a mistake. The word is embezzlement. You stole $190,000 from your client's escrow accounts over a period of 12 months. Your company didn't ask you to pay it back. They caught you, and they were preparing a criminal case that would send you to prison for 10 to 15 years. Nathan stopped breathing. He was staring at me, his mind clearly racing, trying to understand how this was possible. How could the senile old man... "And you," I said, turning my gaze to Diana. "You didn't just find out. You were in on it from the beginning. You were the one who researched non-extradition countries. You were the one who booked the one-way tickets. You were the one who planned to abandon your own 7-year-old daughter here on Christmas Day while you and this thief ran away to a beach, leaving me to clean up your mess, leaving me to pay the $200,000 debt you'd racked up on my name. You, Diana stammered, her face contorting from shock to pure, unadulterated rage. You've been spying on us, You're sick. Nathan, he's lost his mind. He's been spying on us. She grabbed her phone from the table. She fumbled with the lock, her hands shaking, and then aimed the camera at me. She was recording. You see, she shrieked, her voice now loud, performing for the video. You see what I told you? He's paranoid. He's delusional. Greg, you are a sick old man. You're obsessed with us. She panned the camera around my small, simple kitchen. He lives like this in this dump, and he thinks he knows about Cayman Islands. He's tracking us. He's insane, Nathan. This is it. This is the proof we needed. Nathan was still frozen, his brain unable to catch up. Mom, what? How? This is perfect, Greg. Diana screamed, her eyes wild, a terrifying, triumphant smile spreading across her face. She thought she had me. She thought this was her moment. She thought my paranoia was the final piece of evidence she needed to prove I was incompetent. She believed in her arrogance that she had just won. She's right, Nathan, Diana said, her voice dripping with venomous pity. Your mother is deeply unwell. We were right to file the petition. He needs help. I just watched her. I let her finish. I let her dig her own grave right there in my kitchen. When she was finally done, panting, holding her phone up like a weapon, I took a calm sip of my tea. Are you done? I asked. She glared at me. That was a very good performance, Diana, I said. Very convincing. The desperate, concerned daughter-in-law, worried about my mental health. I smiled, a smile that didn't touch my eyes. Tell me, I said, leaning forward, is that the same performance you were planning to give at the emergency guardianship hearing, the one you have scheduled for tomorrow, December 26th at the Travis County Courthouse? The phone in Diana's hand wavered. The color which had rushed to her face in a furious blush drained away completely. She stared at me, her mouth open. The one, I continued, where you were going to present sworn affidavits from your friends stating that I'm senile. The one where you were going to use my dollhouse as proof of my regression to childhood. The one where you were going to get a judge to grant you power of attorney so you could have me committed to a nursing home and liquidate my assets. Diana's phone clattered from her trembling hand onto the table. Nathan finally made a sound. It was a low, choked gasp. He looked from me to his wife, and in that instant he understood. He understood that she hadn't just been planning an escape. She had been planning my execution. How? Diana whispered, her voice barely audible. How do you know that? Because, I said, I'm not a retired factory foreman. I stood up. I walked across the living room to the back wall, the one covered by an old faded bookshelf filled with Clara's gardening books. Mom, what are you doing? Nathan asked, his voice shaking. I put my hand on the side of the bookshelf and pushed. With a soft hydraulic hiss that was utterly silent in the small house, the entire bookshelf, books, shelves, and all swung inward, revealing a dark staircase leading down into the concrete foundation. Nathan and Diana just stared, their faces a mask of complete and total disbelief. You have a basement, Nathan stammered. This house is on a slab. Appearances can be deceiving, son, I said. I turned and looked down the stairs, into the darkness. Paul, I think our guests are ready. Footsteps. Heavy, measured footsteps coming up the stairs. A moment later, a man emerged into the light of my kitchen. He was in his late 60s like me, but he wore a perfectly tailored three-piece suit. He was holding a thick, leather-bound briefcase. It was my friend, my lawyer, my partner. It was Peterson. "Paul," Nathan whispered. He recognized him. He'd met him at Clara's funeral, introduced as an old friend from the factory. "Hello, Nathan," Peterson said. His voice was polite, but his eyes were chips of ice. "Diana." "What? What is this?" Diana demanded, finding her voice. "Who are you? What is going on?" "This," Peterson said, "is what you'd call a change in circumstances." He stepped aside, and two more men walked up the stairs behind him. They were not lawyers. They were tall, they were built, and they were wearing the unmistakable dark blue windbreakers of the Austin Police Department's Financial Crimes Division. Diana saw them. She let out a small, strangled scream. Nathan shot to his feet, knocking his chair over. He looked at the door. He looked at the windows. He looked at the detectives. He was trapped. "Nathan Stone. Diana Stone." The first detective said, his voice filling the small, quiet room. "You are both under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder fraud, perjury, and felony theft." "No," Diana shrieked, lunging for the door. "You can't. We're the victims. He's the one who's crazy. He's the one who's... Her voice died as the second detective calmly stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to put your hands behind your back." As the detectives began the methodical process of cuffing my son and his wife, Nathan just stood there limp, his eyes locked on mine. He didn't resist. He just stared, his face a hollow mask of defeat. "Mom," he whispered. I don't understand. Your house, who are you?" Peterson stepped forward, opening his briefcase on my kitchen table. He clicked it open. "Your mother, Nathan," Paul said, his voice cold and clear, "is Gregory Stone of Stone and Peterson Global Logistics. Her current net worth is $82 million. Diana stopped fighting. She just froze. "The house you were living in," Paul continued, "was purchased for you in cash by your father 10 years ago. The mortgage you were paying was a legal fiction he created to deposit money into your daughter's trust fund. The $200,000 line of credit you defaulted on was guaranteed personally by him. The petition for guardianship you filed was dismissed by a judge this morning in light of overwhelming evidence to the contrary." Peterson reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small digital audio recorder. "And finally," he said, "we have this." He pressed play, and the kitchen filled with Diana's voice, cold, calculating, clear as a bell. "Just get him into the nursing home. Once we have guardianship, we have total control. He'll be so doped up he won't even remember his own name. We sell everything. We pay off the debts. And we are gone. He's just a confused old man. Who's going to believe him?" The recording clicked off. The detectives who had paused during the recording took Nathan and Diana by the arms. You, Diana sputtered, looking at me, that her face a mask of pure, concentrated hatred. "You bastard!" "Get them out of my house," I said to the detectives. And they did. I watched them walk my son, my only child, out of my kitchen in handcuffs. He never looked back, not once. The detectives led them out of my house in handcuffs. I watched through the small kitchen window as they were put into the back of separate patrol cars. Diana was screaming, her voice shrill and ugly, still shouting about her rights, about her parents, about how this was all a mistake. Nathan was silent. He just looked at his feet. As the car door closed, he looked up just for a second, and his eyes met mine through the window. There was no remorse in his gaze, no sadness, just a cold, empty hatred. The look of a man who wasn't sorry for what he did, only sorry he got caught. When the sirens faded, my house was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. It was the heavy, sterile silence of a hospital room after a long, complicated surgery. An amputation had taken place. The diseased parts had been cut away. Peterson was still at my kitchen table packing his briefcase. He looked at me, his face grim. "It's done, Greg," he said. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," he said, "it gets loud." He was right. By the next morning, it was everywhere. The story was too good for the media to resist. It was the lead story on every local news channel in Austin, and it was getting picked up nationally. The headlines were brutal. "The Phantom Foreman, Austin Millionaire's Secret Life Exposed." "Son's Plot to Commit Father Steal Millions Unraveled." "The Aesthetic Deception, How a Greedy Couple's Lies Led to Their Arrest." My quiet, simple life was over. My phone, the flip phone, and my secure line both rang off the hook. I unplugged them all. Alex, my head of security, posted a team at my gate to keep the news vans away. The legal process was swift. Facing $82 million, a team of lawyers from Stone and Peterson, and the full weight of the FBI's evidence on the document forgery, Nathan and Diana didn't stand a chance. Their entire defense crumbled, but their marriage crumbled first. I heard it from Peterson. The moment they were in separate interrogation rooms, Diana sang like a canary. She turned on Nathan with a speed and viciousness that was almost impressive. It was all him, every bit of it. She painted herself as a terrified, manipulated wife, a victim of a charismatic, gambling-addicted criminal. She claimed the embezzlement was his secret, that the $200,000 loan was his scheme, that the plan to have me committed was his desperate, evil idea. She claimed she only went along with it because she was afraid of him. She lied, of course. She lied beautifully. She lied to save herself, and it worked. She took a plea deal. She testified against her own husband. I was in the courtroom for the sentencing. I had to be. Diana was first. She wore a simple, modest gray dress. Her hair was pulled back. No makeup. She looked like a mouse. She cried on the stand as she read her apology to the court and to me. She said she was blinded by a toxic love and was seeking therapy for her codependency. The judge, seeing her full cooperation and her obvious remorse, gave her 5 years of probation, 2,000 hours of community service, and a permanent, legally binding restraining order. She was never to come within 500 feet of me or my granddaughter Emily ever again. She walked out of the courtroom that day a free woman. She didn't look at me. Then it was Nathan's turn. He stood before the judge no longer in his expensive suits, but in an ill-fitting one provided by his public defender. He had nothing left. His own wife had been the star witness against him. The judge read the charges: felony embezzlement from his former firm, conspiracy to commit elder fraud, perjury for the falsified court documents. The sentences were stacked one on top of the other. 10 years, Mr. Stone, the judge said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. 10 years in a state penitentiary. I watched my son, my only son. He stood there, shoulders slumped. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He just looked empty. The ambitious, arrogant man who had planned to steal his father's life was gone. All that was left was a hollow shell. They led him away in chains, and I felt nothing. Not sadness, not anger, not even victory. I just felt empty. The amputation was complete. The cancer was gone. But the space where my son used to be was now just a void. I walked out of the courthouse, the media shouting my name. I ignored them all. I got in the car with Peterson. "It's over," I said. "Almost," he replied. "We have one last piece of business, the most important one." He was right. The next day I was in Peterson's office. Not my hidden command center, but his real office on the 50th floor of the Stone and Peterson Tower downtown, the one with views overlooking the entire city. The girl, I said. Emily. Paul nodded. He slid a folder across the vast mahogany desk. Her trust fund. The one you've been paying into for 10 years with Nathan's fake mortgage payments. What's the damage? None, Paul said. It's completely insulated. It was never in Nathan's name and Diana has no claim to it. It is solely legally and untouchably in Emily Stone's name to be accessed by her on her 21st birthday. Her mother, I said. Diana, the restraining order is good, but she's still her mother. She'll find a way to manipulate her. She'll get her hands on that money. Not if we act now, Paul said. I looked at the folder. The account was now worth just over $430,000. It was the only good thing to come out of Nathan's decade of lies. I want it locked down, Paul, I said. I want a legal firewall built around that money so high that Diana can't even smell it. I want a co-trustee appointed, a professional, someone from the bank, someone who answers only to me. Diana is not to have any signatory rights. No access, no information, nothing. That money is for Emily, for her education, for her future. It is not and never will be for her mother. Peterson nodded, already making notes. Consider it done. We'll file the motion with the court this afternoon citing Diana's felony conviction and the restraining order. No judge in this state will argue. Good, I said. I stood up and walked to the vast floor-to-ceiling window. I looked down at the city of Austin, my city. It was all finally done. Nathan was in prison. Diana was a convicted felon disbarred from my life. Their marriage was over. And Emily, my granddaughter, she was finally truly safe. Safe from them. And safe from their greed. The cost had been my entire family, but the price for my granddaughter's future, I knew in that moment I would pay it all over again. A week later, the news vans were gone. The reporters had moved on to the next scandal. My bungalow was quiet again. I was sitting in my real office, the command center, not the small kitchen. Peterson sat across from me. We weren't drinking cheap coffee. We were drinking a 25-year-old scotch. The bottle had been collecting dust saved for a special occasion. I decided this qualified. The monitors on the wall were no longer dark. They were lit up, showing the sprawling complex web of my assets. The 82 million. The logistics company, the real estate holdings, the stock portfolio. It looked obscene. It felt heavy. I swirled the amber liquid in my glass. Clara was right, I said. My voice was quiet, just a rumble in the silent, air-conditioned room. Paul looked up, his glass untouched. About what, Greg? About this. I gestured at the screens, at the numbers. She said this money would be a curse if we weren't careful. She always said it. Don't let it spoil him, Greg. Don't let it make him weak. I took a sip. The scotch burned. I tried to protect him from it, I said. I built this whole lie, this persona, the retired foreman, the simple life. I thought I was protecting him from the curse, and instead, I just created a different kind of monster. I didn't make him weak. I made him hungry. I made him ashamed. I stared into my glass. I created a void, Paul, and his wife Diana, she just filled it with greed. I created a man so desperate for the aesthetic of wealth, so ashamed of his poor old father, that he was willing to erase me for it. You didn't do this, Greg, Paul said, his voice firm. You made a decision based on love. He made his choices based on greed. That's not on you. Isn't it? I looked up at him. I hid the truth from him for his entire adult life. I treated him like a child I couldn't trust. And then I was surprised when he acted like one. I sighed a long, heavy breath. It's over. He's in prison. She's wherever she is. And I'm still sitting here in a concrete bunker staring at numbers on a screen. Clara was right. It is a curse. Then break it, Paul said simply. I looked at him. What? Break the curse, Greg. You're 70 years old. You've been hiding for 15 years. You've been pretending to be a ghost in your own life. What's the point? What are you saving it all for? For who? He was right. The secrecy, the hiding, the simple bungalow, the old truck. It was all a performance, and the audience was now in prison. The show was over. A new feeling settled over me. Not anger, not sadness, just exhaustion. I'm tired of hiding, Paul, I said. I turned to the monitors, all those numbers, all that power, all of it just sitting there dormant. I'm done, I said. I'm done pretending. I stood up. Sell it. Paul blinked. Sell what, Greg? The company. No, not the company. Sell the assets, the secondary properties, the shadow holdings. I want you to start liquidating a significant portion of the portfolio. I want 10 million in liquid cash, as soon as possible. Paul stood up. Greg, that's a massive move. What are you planning to do with it? I looked at the photo of Clara, the one I'd brought from my bungalow, and placed on the steel desk, her laughing eyes. I'm going to start using it, I said. Like she would have wanted. Like we should have years ago. I turned back to Paul. I want you to set up a foundation. A new one. Call it the Clara Stone Foundation. And I want its mission to be simple. For kids like Emily. Kids who are trapped. Kids whose parents fail them. We're not going to hide this money anymore, Paul, I said. We're going to put it to work. We're going to do some good with it. Let's break this damn curse for good. 1 year. 365 days had passed since I had last seen my son, since I had watched him be led out of my kitchen in handcuffs. It was Christmas again. But this Christmas, I was not in the small, cramped bungalow. I was not hiding. I was home. I was in the house I had just finished building, a perfect life-sized replica of the dollhouse I had built for Emily, the house Clara and I had first lived in. But this time it wasn't a young couple's starter home. It was a fortress of memory built on a beautiful, quiet piece of land deep in the hill country with the best materials my $82 million could buy. I was in my new workshop, a vast, clean space that smelled of fresh-cut pine and coffee. The windows looked out over a valley covered in a light dusting of snow. The Clara Stone Foundation was fully operational. Peterson handled the day-to-day, but I approved every grant. We had funded 3 new shelters for abused children and a legal aid fund for the elderly fighting guardianship fraud. My money was no longer a secret. It was a tool. It was finally working. I was finishing a small wooden bird sanding the wings smooth. It was for Emily. I still made her gifts. I didn't know if she would ever get them. The restraining order was ironclad against Diana. And since Emily was only 8, Diana's custody meant my granddaughter was by default kept from me. I hadn't seen her in 365 days. The doorbell chimed. I froze. My hands stopped moving. I wasn't expecting anyone. Peterson was in Aspen with his family. My security head, Alex, was stationed at the main gate a mile down the road. He would have called if it was a threat. This was just a visitor. I walked through the new house, my boots echoing on the wide plank oak floors. I went to the heavy front door and looked through the peephole. My heart stopped. It was them. Emily. She was 8 now. She looked taller, thinner. Her hair was longer. She was wearing a simple pink coat that looked a size too small, and her hands were stuffed into her pockets. And behind her, standing just off the porch, was Diana. My hand tightened on the doorknob. The ice. The old, cold, surgical ice. I felt it begin to creep back into my veins. Then I looked again. This was not the Diana I remembered. This was not the woman in the designer dress who had sneered at my aesthetic. The perfect icy blonde hair was gone. It was replaced by a mousy dishwater brown pulled back in a simple frayed ponytail. The $1,000 coat was gone, replaced by a thin black parka, the kind you buy from a discount rack. And underneath it, I recognized the uniform. A black polo shirt and a matching black apron stained with what looked like coffee. I could just make out the faded logo of a 24-hour highway diner. She wasn't a brand anymore. She wasn't an aesthetic. She was a waitress. She had been working. She had been humbled. She had been paying in a way that prison never could. She saw me looking at her through the glass. She flinched. She physically flinched and took a half step back, pulling her cheap parka tighter as if to hide the diner's logo. She was ashamed. For the first time since I had met her, the emotion on her face was not arrogance. It was not anger. It was not manipulation. It was genuine, unfiltered shame. I opened the door. The cold air rushed in. Emily looked up at me, her eyes wide. "Grandpa?" Her voice was small, tentative. Diana immediately put her hands on Emily's shoulders, staying back, not daring to step onto the porch. "Honey, I told you we can't just... He's busy." "I wanted to see him," Emily insisted, her voice desperate. She pulled away from her mother and took a step toward me. Diana wouldn't look at me. She was staring at the intricate woodworking of my porch railing at the welcome mat. Her face was gaunt. She was tired. The fire, the venom, the arrogance, it was all gone. "Diana," I said. My voice was just gravel. I hadn't spoken her name in a year. She jumped, startled. She finally forced her eyes to meet mine. I saw fear. But it was a different kind of fear now. It wasn't the fear of being caught. It was the fear of a person who has no power left. "Mr. Stone," she said, formal, quiet. I'm sorry. We shouldn't have come. The restraining order. I'm on the public road. I'm 500 feet away. I'm not violating it. I'm just... She pushed Emily forward slightly, a small, helpless gesture. She wouldn't stop asking, Diana whispered, and her voice cracked. "She misses you. I told her I would just ask. That's all. We'll go. I'm sorry to bother you." She started to turn, reaching for Emily's hand. "Come on, Em. Let's go." And I just stood there, watching them. The woman who had tried to have me buried alive. The woman who had helped my son plan my financial and social execution. The woman who was now working double shifts at a diner to pay off her court-mandated restitution. And my son, Nathan. He was in a low-security prison working in the library. He was taking accounting classes. He wrote me letters. One every week. I hadn't opened a single one. They were in a box in my office right next to the original plans for this very house. The cycle of pain. It was standing right here on my porch. I could close the door. I had every right to. I could call Alex. I could call the police and have her arrested for violating the spirit of the restraining order. I could let them walk back down the long, cold driveway to whatever beat-up car she drove now. I could keep the ice. I could hold on to the victory. I looked at Emily. She was looking at me, her face crumpled with the familiar disappointment of a child who never gets what she wants. She was the only one who was truly innocent. She was the one who had lost her father to prison, her mother to poverty and shame, and her grandfather to an anger she couldn't possibly understand. All because of this. All because of the money. Clara's voice a whisper from 20 years ago. Don't let it be a curse, Greg. Don't let it just be about winning. If I closed this door, the curse would continue. The hate would continue. The ice would win. Diana was already walking away, pulling a reluctant Emily with her. It's cold outside, I said. My voice sounded strange even to me. It wasn't the voice of the CEO. It wasn't the voice of the angry father. It was just a voice. Diana stopped. She turned around slowly, her face a mask of utter disbelief. The light snow was starting to stick to Emily's hair. I didn't smile. I didn't open my arms. I didn't say, I forgive you. I didn't say, it's okay. I just looked at them. The broken woman and the innocent child. I stepped back from the door. I opened it wider. The warm air from my house smelling of the fresh pine I had on the fire and the hot chocolate I was making spilled out onto the cold porch. I'm making hot chocolate, I said. Come in. Greg's story is a powerful lesson in how appearances hide the truth. He pretended to be poor to protect his son from the curse of wealth, only to discover that the shame of poverty and the hunger for status corrupted his son just as badly. It shows that the people most obsessed with the aesthetic of success are often the ones hiding the deepest moral and financial failures. This story reminds us that true value is not measured by a bank account or a luxury car, but by dignity, honesty, and the strength to protect yourself even from the people you are supposed to love. What would you have done if you were in Greg's shoes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you believe that justice must be served, hit that like button and subscribe for more.